Welcome to Olympian Method, the show where we ask the big questions in philosophy.
And then we doubt our own answers, which is where you come in.
We need your help to provide the answers.
Well, thanks for having me again.
Hey, it's so good to be here. We are in the middle of a great discussion on the nature of morality, on good versus evil, all those good things. And we were just talking...
Are they good, though?
They're not bad.
They're not bad.
So we were just talking a little bit about the nature of what makes the ultimate evil. And I think you had some good theories on that. And we had talked about whether it was betrayal. There was an individual aspect of sort of things that are counter to your own survival. Mm-hmm. So have we come to a conclusion here in terms, or have we come to a better understanding here of what we think what constitutes the ultimate evil?
Well, I'm going to give a hypothesis, and you tell me what you think about it. Is that I think the ultimate evil is when you behave in a way that if everyone else behaved in that similar way, it would lead to the complete annihilation of everything.
So yeah, this reminds me of Kant's moral imperative, which I'm not trying to drop too many references here, but the whole idea is that you want to adopt a moral structure that you would have. It's very related to the golden rule, where you would have all of humanity follow the rules that you're following, basically.
Right.
And there's certain built-in inherent limitations to that, because certain behaviors just you can't build a system of morality on top of it. Like murder, for example. If everyone's allowed to do that, then there's no one left to murder everyone anymore.
Right. I did want to go. I think what I started to talk about in the last episode that I actually want to modify a bit. I want to make an addendum on my own point, because I actually think it's slightly flawed. Is I said, when people have more power, they have a more of an imperative to be good. But I do think that, the nature of their decision of whether it is good or evil is the same regardless of where you exist in the power structure. I think someone who's very low, for example, in a dominance hierarchy or any sort of competence hierarchy, but whether it be, economically based, socially based, those people, regardless of where you are in that hierarchy, even if you're at the bottom, you can still be very, very evil. Mm-hmm. You can be, and the same for the people at the top as well. Like vice versa, you can be at the bottom of the hierarchy, but be very, very good as well. Same for the people at the top. So I think the outcome of making good and bad decisions is, from a utilitarian perspective, more weighted if you have more power. Yeah. But I think that the actual idea of using Kant's categorical imperative, I think that's what it's called.
Yeah,
right?
That's what it's called.
If a person at the bottom is behaving like reprehensibly, and maybe let's say they're not following any of the 10 commandments, for example,
they're not going to get far in life with that.
Right. Sorry, did you want to go into religion here, or did you want to go into it in the next episode?
Well, yeah, I was going to save the deep dive on religion for later, but
apologies for that.
No problem. But yeah, so I think it does. What's interesting about what you're just telling me is that a lot of it does come down to intent, not necessarily whether you're able to realize good or bad or good or evil outcomes in the world, right?
Right.
Because you may not be in a position where you have either the strength or the power or whatever to make those a reality. But if they're in your head, it seems like there's still an inherent evilness to them, even if you never act on them or never able to act on them, let's say.
Right. Sorry, I did lose my train of thought for a second, but I thought about the notion of responsibility. We kind of mentioned that a little bit in the last podcast, treating yourself as just someone that you're responsible for taking care of, mm-hmm. and, obstacles the way sort of thing, trying to think about things as in terms of good. I think that's why my mind went there. You need to think of things in the Jocko sense of good, mm-hmm. when things happen to you. Right. But is that the same as it being like morally good? Because someone can do something bad to you, for example, or bad to me, and it's evil. But we still have the ability to shape whether we see it as a good thing that it was done to us, because it gives us an opportunity to grow.
So I have a follow-on question. I'm curious what you'll give the answer as. Is there a difference to you between what's good and what's virtuous?
Oh, wow.
Are those different concepts, or are those kind of the same?
Well, there's a saying, I forget where I read it, but that virtue is a precursor to the culminating insight. And I believe that culminating insight is on what is good. Mm-hmm. Maybe what is like the ultimate categorical imperative, what is the ultimate equation or algorithm that we all ought to operate on.
Right.
But I think some virtue is based on responsibility. Mm-hmm. I think virtue, there's different ways of measuring virtue. I think different cultures have different ways of measuring virtue, but one of them could be, for example, is staying your anger, turning the other cheek. Someone hits you, you turn the other cheek. That could be considered virtuous, is not being reactive. to a certain extent. It's having courage, for example. Courage is considered a virtue.
Right.
What is courage? It's accepting the possibility of failure, but then choosing to pursue at your own peril in the hopes of success. And there's, I think, Eudaimonia, we mentioned that maybe in our first episode, perhaps?
A while ago, yeah.
A while ago, but to bring it back, it's the difference between like complete laziness and cowardice and then recklessness. There's like a middle ground between that. So I think virtue actually exists in that middle ground between cowardice and recklessness.
Interesting. Yeah. So would the concept of eudaimonia, would that be kind of like living a life of virtue or the good life or something like that?
It's as close to the middle path in the Buddhist tradition as possible, I believe.
Okay, cool. So changing topics just slightly here, because I want to move the discussion on a little bit.
Absolutely.
Do you believe that it's possible to gain moral knowledge or to like work through the nature of morality in a purely logical way? Is it possible, like through your powers of deduction, to decide what is actually good and evil, or is there something else that needs to be at play here?
Okay, and I want to ask just a clarifying question. Is it possible to just use moral reasoning in the absence of, say, a religious substructure?
Yeah, so we're not involving religion at this point. This is purely logical thinking using reason, right?
Okay. I mean, I do think it is possible, because it is. We notice patterns very well. I think we mentioned, you see the sun rise a couple of times, you realize the sun's always going to rise,
right? Unless
something really awful happens. So I think we do the same thing when we see certain types of behavior. For example, theft has always been something that's been very commonly condemned in all societies. It used to, like Hammurabi's code, I think it was an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, you know?
Yeah. And I think there's probably what we consider a notion of fairness built into that as well, right? That in order to build up a society where your property rights are not infringed, or where you have sort of that autonomy over your life, right?
Yeah.
You need to have a certain guarantee, or there needs to be certainty that you will be able to exercise that autonomy over your possessions, for example.
Right. And I think primarily is you have the idea of self-property. Like your body is like a property that you own, that your consciousness, that your mind owns.
Yeah, and that gets back into the whole Stoic mindset of keep the temple of your mind clean, focus on that first, because I think this gets into the notion of that sort of a morality system, because there's a large part of that system is based off of what you value, and what you should value highest is kind of your own cognitive abilities, or at least what gifts you have in terms of your own mind.
I would even go a step further beyond that, not just your cognitive abilities, but your wisdom.
Yes. And so what that means is, and so this is sort of how this helps you get through adversity, is let's say you lose all your possessions for some reason, right? That you don't want to be defined, your value should not be defined by what you possess in that case. You should be able to bounce back from that and say, well, I have the same mind that allowed me to gain everything before. It's a challenge. Let me just go through and do it all over again, right?
I need to go back to telepathy a little bit, because I was thinking about this very same thing today.
Oh boy.
You need to get out of my head, man. So side note, I was thinking, I have a lot of guitars.
Okay, I know this.
All my, and everyone I know says I have too many. I'd say you can never have too many. But I was thinking, it's how would I feel if all these got stolen or burned or destroyed? And I'm like, well, I would still exist. It would suck. I wouldn't have an outlet. But it's kind of started, anyway, back towards the notion of what is good. I think it's the primary evaluation of yourself, first and foremost. And what's in your best interest is usually 99% of the time, if not 100% of the time, in everyone else's best interest too. So, for example, it's good to breathe.
Yeah, we tend to value that.
Yeah. Anyways, I don't want to steal thunder or go out of questions, but I was inspired to think of a question that you had posited to me before the podcast, which was, essentially, can what's morally good be in line with what's our desires, or does it counteract our desires? I think you had a different way of phrasing that, but do you want to go there now, or?
I was going to go there next, actually.
Okay.
So, yeah, actually, well, let me just tag
a sign of what's to come, folks.
Yeah, let me tag on a question to what I had just asked there, which is, in what other ways besides your logical reasoning do you think we can deduce or learn the nature of morality, what is good and what is evil?
Well, I think based on sensory experience, and I think pain, physical pain, is actually a very interesting way.
Yeah, and especially as regards to it sort of calibrates your intentions and your motivations, right?
Right. Well, Matthew McConaughey wrote a memoir recently where he was talking about how his father beat him, but he wasn't like a drunk out like mean guy. It was like Matthew McConaughey remembers it as whenever Matthew did something kind of bad. Mm-hmm. I'm using that term loosely because we're trying to unpack that question.
Right.
But in the context, I guess, of a Western society of what's bad, lying, hitting your brother or anything like that, his father would beat him. But that pain caused a very almost Pavlovian response where it's like, hey, I shouldn't do that because it causes me pain. Mm-hmm. So it's like we think about hitting your kids as being like bad, intrinsically bad because it causes them pain. But the notion of sacrifice, right? Mm-hmm. It's a little bit of pain now to teach them a valuable lesson that will save them from pain. Because when kids are developing, if they don't have a sense of boundaries growing up, they'll make everyone else's lives around them miserable. And if they're not properly socialized by the age of 2, they basically can develop an antisocial tendency personality. And that's a very strong indicator that they'll actually wind up in prison.
Yeah, so it kind of has to serve a higher purpose in a way.
Yeah, you can't just be seeking. You can't just be seeking to beat up on people for your own intrinsic benefit. It's kind of like martial arts. You never spar full out. You only spar in certain ways to teach the lesson of, hey, keep your guard up. Don't tuck and roll at this time, etc. Whatever it might be. So.
Yeah, so I'm curious. What do you think is the equivalent to that in terms of how do we exercise our morality, and what helps us figure out the boundaries of where good and evil lie?
Right. Your boundaries of good and evil. So,
because it seems like that we're saying that there is a biological component to it in some ways, at least as it relates to survival, right?
Right. Well, I mean, let's think about this. Do you like if somebody was like cheating on you, for example, you don't need to be taught to feel jealous or envious. It's jealousy that you're feeling. It just naturally biologically happens.
Yeah.
But we also built on a lot of our structures around the idea that cheating is clearly bad. Mm-hmm. So how do we reconcile? Like it's not something that we've come through the terms of reason. It's come through our emotional experience.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and so do you think the notion of fairness that's sort of ingrained in all of us is something that came biologically?
I think so.
Okay.
And
or because I'm wondering if there's a component to it that's also been sort of passed down in a more social construct where we tell narratives around what it means to be fair, or there's the stuff we're going to get into about religion as well about that.
Well, I do think there's a sociological component to this. I mean, there's a biological component as well. But the thing to realize is like in the whole nature versus nurture debate, and I'm going to tie this into good versus evil, I promise, is that people are biological, but they also, in the terms of community, they're also a part of the environment. Mm. So in many respects, the physical apartment that we're in right now is part of the environment, but you're also kind of part of the environment too. But you're like a living, breathing, responding version of the environment. Does that make sense? In a way?
I guess let me try and unpack what I'm thinking you're saying. So are you saying that the environment we're in is determining how we see good and evil, or?
Almost, yeah. I mean, like in certain cultures that I'm not trying to make a relativistic stance, because I think actually moral relativism is pretty reprehensible in my own personal morality structure, but they do have a sense of what is good, and their societies do largely work, even if some of their actions could be considered reprehensible relative to ours. And I do think a lot of that is sociologically passed down and sociologically just as a consequence of that. For example, like in the West, I mean, you and I are in the United States,
right?
Very Christian background country for the most part. There's
well, especially as you go back to our founding, right?
Right. I mean, like all the way back even to the Mayflower, you had people who were basically coming here for the right to practice their own religious freedom.
Right. And there's still, to a large part, built an ingrained culture of what do you call it? Like freedom of religion.
Yeah, exactly. And freedom of expression. I mean, I think that's
built in the First Amendment.
Built in the First Amendment. and we're kind of going down a little bit more of the social into the social contract theories a little bit.
Yeah, I wanted to try and wrap up the social part of things before we go into the religious aspect of things next.
But I think that for example, in the context of a country, which, you know, I was thinking about it at first from the terms of an individual and then maybe a larger tribal communities and everything like that. But a country is basically essentially a giant tribal community, ideally, right? Like you would think that all the people would agree with the Bill of Rights, for example, or you would hope that everyone would see it that way because it's meant to actually serve everybody in a sense.
But the challenge with that is that the same like dynamics at play that work in a tribal level don't scale beyond, I think it's like 100 to 200 people. Like
right.
The number of connections that you would have to have with people, just it grows beyond scale at that point. So that's where, once you get to like city size or larger, that's where you run into some issues with not everyone being able to come up with agreement on these types of things, right?
Right. Man, I'm kind of stumped on this one. I mean, I'm trying to come up with answers, but audience, do you guys have any answers? We'd love to know your thoughts in the comments, please.
Right. So I think that about wraps up this section we're in here. So looking forward to moving on to the next one with you.
Wolf, enjoying it greatly.
Thank you.
Looking forward to next time.
Yep.